the construct, the measurement, and what your feedback tells you. So I've divided this up into 4 sections. What is the purpose of intercultural communication edge? What does it do? How did we create the scale, and a bit about its validity and what it measures, what the profile looks like, and then what the feedback looks like and what comprises the feedback. Okay. So the goals of the intercultural communication edge are to help learners understand the sociocultural roots of diverse communication styles. And in particular, with the feedback report, you have seen that you learn a lot about your own style. So it's we teach a lot about self-awareness and emphasize that the goal is not to change your communication style. It's not to improve your communication style. We don't say that one style is better or worse than the other. But the goal is to be aware of your own style and sort of some of the roots of it, why it might be that I communicate that way and prefer to communicate that way. And then also understanding why it is that people you encounter in your daily life may have a different communication style. And then the third goal is to improve your communication effectiveness. And so this icEdge helps you do that because it helps you understand the communication approaches of others so that you can anticipate when there may be a misunderstanding. You can anticipate and make an informed decision about whether you want to adjust or adapt your own style in a particular situation, when you need to engage in certain active listening or information search behaviors to be able to effectively interpret what your counterpart is saying. If we teach that effective communication often depends on intentional rather than habitual decisions about how to communicate your message and how to interpret your counterpart's message. And so intercultural communication edge also gives skills to help manage effective communication in any kind of diverse communication setting. So it could be a team, it could be a workplace, it could be a family, it could be really anything. Okay, so the instrument we developed and tested for all different kinds of validity. I thought there was another slide here. Let me just really quickly look. Oh, okay, no, it's just that it hasn't all popped up yet. So I'm going to quickly go through some of these. Face validity basically refers to an instrument that doesn't make sense. So if taken at face value, does it seem to measure what it says it will? And so this measure is grounded in Hall's theory, and there's a lot of anecdotal evidence and ways that interculturalists have been teaching communication that also suggest that it's more than just direct and indirectness. And also importantly, the items assess communication behaviors, mostly behaviors, about 90% behaviors, and then attitudes towards communication behaviors. So it's really all focused on communication. And then for content validity, we ask whether it's the measure actually measures what we say it's going to measure, so the theorized content domain. And so over about 10 years, as I mentioned, multiple data sets, we ran confirmatory factor analyses and showed sort of over and over again that the instrument does measure 4 separate and distinct kinds of context, but that all of those are related to this sort of overarching construct of context dependence. So we've shown that statistically. Convergent validity addresses whether or not an instrument varies consistently in expected ways with other similar or different measures. And so we have some empirical data to show this. It measures as we would expect with self-construal as well as cultural intelligence. And then cross-cultural or differential validity doesn't measure the intended construct in a way that's free from culture or other demographic bias. And so we have replicated the model and the items with both a Chinese sample in Mandarin and a Chilean sample and a Mexican sample in Spanish. So At this point, we're confident in saying that it does have cross-cultural validity for at least those groups, but we have not yet tested it more broadly. We plan to do that. Okay. So another thing we want to look at when we're looking at psychometric validity is how are these constructs related to one another? And so the next couple slides, I have a whole bunch of, I have some correlational data there. Again, I'm not going to go into detail about what it means, but I'd be happy to talk about that one-on-one with anyone who's, really into the statistics part of it. But this just shows you the correlation between each of the kinds of context and between each other. And so intercultural communication EDGE has basically a 3-level hierarchical structure. And this is what you would have seen in your feedback report if you took a look and started clicking around. So the first level is what we call communication style, and that's the broadest level. You basically you get 4 scores, 1 for each kind of context dependence. And then at level 2, you get 12 scores. So it digs a little bit deeper, gives you a little bit more information about each of those kinds of context dependence. And then level 3 is where really all of this super interesting stuff is. That's where you get to behaviors and attitudes, and here you get 28 scores. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like, and then we'll take a look at some sample feedback. So message context, this is the one where I said a good way to, quick and easy way to teach someone what this is do you mean what you say and say what you mean? So the level 1 is what we call message style. And then if you start to drill down, if you click on message style, you'll get your score for expression. So your expressiveness, interpretation. So that's when you're interpreting others, verbal communications, and then conflict management style. And then if you drill down deeper again, each of those has subscales. So for example, conflict management has two subscales, avoid conflict and avoid disagreement. Expression has 3 subscales, communicate based on feelings, communicate indirectly, and persuade gently. And we've named all of these constructs so that it conveys the high context version of it, right? So persuading gently is a high context way of engaging in persuasion because you're taking into consideration your counterpart's feelings, right? So a really direct and forceful way where you just sort of, trying to persuade and influence someone verbally and forcefully, that would be more of a low context style of expression. And so these slides, you'll see all the little arrows and arcs with the correlation coefficients as well. So that gives you some more data on the psychometric properties if you're interested in that. Okay, so relationship context starts with relationship style in level 1. Level 2 has openness, relational adjustment, and network reliance. So openness has to do with the degree to which you, when you're communicating with others, you're sort of straightforward and forthcoming. To what degree do you, do you open up to strangers? And relational adjustment, this is very related to the concept of face in communication. So do you change what you say and how you say it based on, saving face for yourself or the other? And then network reliance has to do with when you're communicating and getting things done in life, to what degree do you first go to people you know or people who know someone you know, and that sort of thing. Space context starts out with sensory style at level 1, and then level 2 has physical contact, body language, and dramatic expression. And so this one, the space context is the one people are probably least familiar with. As I mentioned, there's really not much out there at all that measures this. So I'm going to go ahead and go through all of the level 3 ones here. So for physical contact, the The construct physical contact has to do with, so if you're high on physical contact in space context, it means that you engage the communication space with your counterpart. So I like to call it communal space, right? So you prefer to touch the person, to stand near them when you're talking to them, because you're sharing that communication space, that space in between you where you are talking. So touching and standing your counterpart are the level 3 scales for that. For body language, here, this one, actually all 3 of the subscales for this are attitudes. So that closeness, so being close to your counterpart is polite in communication. Looking the person in the eye is polite, and facing the other person is polite. So again, what it's measuring here is the degree to which your physical closeness and your eye contact, etc., and your body position are communicating engagement and affiliation with the other. Like it's part of the communication going on. And then the last one, dramatic expression, that's the level 2 construct. And at level 3, it comprises interruption, avoiding silence, loudness is engaging, and dramatic expression. And so this one gets at the idea that it's similar to the physical contact, but the physical contact is sharing communication space physically with your body, your arms, your touching, and dramatic expression is sharing communication space verbally. Right? So when you interrupt someone to show that you are engaged and listening and you're excited and you have something to say, if you use dramatic expression and change your tone of voice and vary your speech rate when you're telling a story to create drama and engage your counterpart in the story you're telling. Those are all examples of high context, high space context communication. Okay, so I'm going to pause there because this is often one that people have a lot of questions about. Any questions about that or the previous 2 ones as well? I could answer some questions now. Oh, you guys are awesome.
I'm not sure I understand the concept of dramatic expression as a subcomponent.
Okay, so dramatic expression has to do with the degree to which you vary your tone of voice, you vary the rate of speech in order to engage your counterpart, to create a shared communication experience, basically. So you're more expressive because you are trying to engage the other.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, I'll go on and there'll be more opportunities for questions. So time context, this one is one that if any of you were just at CETAR, I just presented a whole session just on this one aspect of it, trying to get some input on how we can improve our measurement of this one. This is the one we've actually, frankly, had the most trouble capturing the breadth of the way Hall talked about time as context in our measures. Things are not loading together. We're not getting good, reliable scales, except for this. So what we have at level 1, time management style. Level 2, we have something we call task structure. I'll tell you more about that in a second. But the other 2 are the degree to which you're flexible with schedules and the degree to which you're flexible with deadlines. And just to be clear here, both of those 2 are it's actually the same scale at level 2 and level 3. It doesn't get broken down at all. But for task structure at level 3, it's broken down into multitasking and flexible with time. So flexible with deadlines is pretty self-explanatory. You know, to what degree is it for you? Does a deadline mean a deadline? And same thing with schedules. But flexible with time has to do with people's preferences for example, using a date book and scheduling specific times for specific things throughout their day, and you know how they fare when they don't have their schedule with them, how flexible they are if something comes up and disrupts the schedule that they had planned. And multitasking is exactly what you think it is. That is one of the things Hall wrote about most often when he wrote about monochronic and polychronic time. He talked about sequential versus simultaneously engaging in tasks throughout the day. Okay, so that's time context. So now let's take a look at what the feedback looks like and what it tells you. As I mentioned before, the way we have it set up right now, all of the questions are designed to measure people's general communication tendencies in the workplace. So the preface to the questions about at work is something that in future versions of the survey you can sort of customize that, so it doesn't have to be necessarily about the workplace. It could be in your close personal relationships, for example. So it's descriptive and not diagnostic. So we're not saying that certain profiles are better than others. It identifies where to anticipate and how to identify challenges, and then gives recommendations for how to adjust in interpersonal and group settings if your communication styles clash. So what else do people see at the different levels? At level 1, you basically just get those 4 scores. You get the definition and an interpretation of your score, and I'll show you an example in a second. Level 2, you get more scores and you get more detailed definitions and interpretations, but it's not until level 3 where you actually get really detailed feedback. So you get 28 scores, and for each one you get a quote that helps illustrate the concept. You get the definition and interpretation of your score, a sample item that you responded to when you took the survey, strengths and challenges, as well as recommendations. And so I'm going to just go through what this might look like, because probably not everyone had a chance to complete the survey or go through your feedback yet. But after our session today, I definitely encourage you to do that and let us know your feedback for us. So this is an example of the first thing you would see when you look at your feedback report. So what is your communication style? You get a score for message style, relationship style, sensory style, and time management style. Previous to this, actually, there's a screen that you would see that describes how to read the placement of your dot, so that if you're closer to the outer edge of the circle, it means you're more indirect or high context. And if you're closer to the inner edge of the circle, this down here, then you would be more direct or low context for that dimension. Another thing is that we have it set up so that instructors can either have just a dot like this, or they can also have a dot plus the numerical score next to it. And so you would see a definition first, and then this is the very next screen where it says, for example, my message style at work is implicit. You're indirect when you express yourself, interpret others, and approach conflict. You often let feelings guide your communication and are adept at understanding and expressing subtle meaning. So the italicized words here are where you're going to see variation across the different profile reports, depending on where someone's dot is. Okay. So say you read all of that, sounds very interesting, you want to know more. So you click on message style. The level 2 looks like this, and whichever quadrant you're in is going to be brighter for the user to see. And so now for communication style, we see that we have 3 characteristics: interpretation, expression, and conflict management. And so for expression and interpretation, I'm closer to the middle, right? But for conflict management, I'm definitely closer to the outer edge, so I'm more indirect. And what I want to show you here is that for each one, you get sort of a more detailed description of what each of these constructs is. And then again, you get a personal interpretation of your result. So you could look at that for interpretation, expression, and conflict management. And then if you want to go deeper, which we want you to, you would click on one of those pie slices and it would explode and show you all of the subscales. So if I clicked on expression, for example, it would pop out and I could separately click on persuade gently, communicate based on feelings, and communicate indirectly. And for each of those over here, you have a quote or an example from research that illustrates the concept. You have a detailed description of the subscale itself. And so just to give you an example of how it's more detailed than the other two levels, if you look here, so the third sentence, it starts to say things like, imagine you want to convince a counterpart to see the value of your marketing plan. Are you more likely to state your opinion once and then leave a pamphlet showing the success of a similar plan on your counterpart's desk and wait to see their decision? That would be gentle persuasion. Or are you more likely to state your opinion repeatedly, offering many examples of supporting evidence until your counterpart complies? That would be firm persuasion, right? So it gives you sort of some real concrete examples of where this construct might be evident in your communication experiences. Okay, and then you get a sample item. You would click on the next little section, you get your own score and an interpretation of that. Then you get strengths and challenges. So for example, here, because I'm really almost in the middle here, it says my moderately indirect style of persuasion. So I'm moderate, but I'm closer to indirect. So if I was at this down here, it would be moderately direct. But I can play along. You can play along and hold your own with counterparts who argue firmly and those who express their positions with subtlety. In a group setting, your fairly gentle style of persuasion will facilitate communication effectiveness and reduce chances of interpersonal tension among group members who persuade very firmly or very gently. Right? So it's sort of highlighting what the strengths are, and that in a highly diverse group, being moderate can be beneficial, right? You're like a bridge. And then lastly, recommendations. So when working in a diverse group, you may find yourself explaining different communication styles to facilitate the discussion, right? So this is actually something I find myself doing a lot in groups, is trying to interpret something that someone else said for someone in my group who's taken offense at it, and saying, you know, no, it's that person's communication style. They're not being obnoxious. So here you get some specific advice that if you find yourself in this kind of a situation, it's important to refer to specific behaviors and situational factors at play. Avoid labeling communication styles as personality. So for example, instead of saying she's aggressive, you can say she expresses her wishes assertively. Or instead of saying he's just quiet, you can explain that in his culture, people voice their position once, the debate has quieted down. So that's an example of all the different kinds of feedback you get for each of the 28 scores once you get to level 3. The rest of the slides here I'll let you look at on your own, or even better, you can just look at your own online profile and, you know, get it in that context with your own style. But basically the rest of the slides to the end of this section are just giving examples of what the feedback looks like and what it comprises for the 4 different quadrants. And then so the summary for this portion of the presentation, what are the essential points for learners? Obviously, you're not going to go into detail about the psychometric properties with most of your groups. I guess it depends on the group, but most of mine, I don't really talk about that much at all. But what I am always sure to emphasize is that it is an instrument that was empirically developed and validated over a 10-year period. And so I think that that's an important thing to convey, right? That it's both theoretically grounded, which was part one of the presentation, and empirically validated, which is part two. So the main thing though for your learners is you want to be sure that they know how to navigate and understand all three levels of feedback, and that they have a good sense of how to extract the information for their own self-awareness piece, and then also have a good idea of how to interpret the feedback about how to apply what they've learned about their own style, and what are the skills that brings to their interpersonal communication toolkit.